Today's podcast is brought to you by Brookwood. Brookwood is an Adobe solution partner and authorized training center specializing in custom e-learning development and enterprise deployment using Adobe Acrobat Connect Professional and Lifecycle. Today we are in the studio with Jack and Jackie. Jackie Beck is a master trainer for Adobe with Acrobat Connect Professional. Jackie has been a trainer and consultant for some of the largest enterprise accounts using Connect. She has designed e-learning portals for the Department of Defense, Pfizer Global Pharmaceuticals, Johnson & Johnson, and the Patent and Trade Office, to name a few. Jack needs no introduction. Let's get started.
Hello there, Jackie. It's nice to see you again.
Same here, Jack. I'm glad you could meet me in the studio so I can address all your questions and share them with our Connect audience. Thanks so much for agreeing to come into the studio today.
No problemo, darling. No problemo at all. Now let's see. It's been a few weeks since you trained me with this Connect product, and I want to get a few questions answered now that I'm a little bit more familiar with the functionality, especially with large meetings. You see, when I do a meeting, it usually involves a very large film crew, so I want to make sure I do this right and only have to do it once. Now, I want to help the audience and myself get their arms and their heads around this Adobe Connect product, because they, just like me, darling, want to try to get some tips and tricks on using this web conferencing technology. Okay, I'm having a large meeting with the entire crew for my next film, a few hundred people. Can you tell me about the prep work that I would need to do before I try to pull this off?
Absolutely. Let's start with some of the pre-event tasks that you need to consider before you begin your first large meeting. Now remember, large or high importance meetings warrant special attention with how you manage and run them. First and foremost is to conduct rehearsals with the same equipment that you're going to use for your actual event. And if you can get a few people to dial in remotely so you can test the latency on your broadcast, well, Jack, that's even better. You want to have several well-versed co-presenters and hosts in the room with you when you conduct your rehearsals so they can give you good feedback. These experienced professionals will be able to give you tips and demonstrate techniques for transitioning between slide decks and layouts during your meeting. Remember to use that presenter-only area for collaborating between fellow presenters before and during the meeting. This area is extremely important so you can stay on track and get that live feedback from your colleagues, like the directors and the producers that you work with.
Rehearsals, huh? Well, I'm not a big fan of those. I like to do it in one take, but your point is well taken. It's more about rehearsing with the technology, not so much the content. That makes sense.
Jack, remember, I've done hundreds of these virtual meetings, training sessions, and webinars. I always rehearse, even though I'm an expert with the technology. And I know that you always rehearse for your films. I know you don't like it, but I'm sure your director has rehearsals with you. So remember, you always rehearse with the technology and the content.
Okay, darling, now talk to me about other software programs like email and what type of connection is best. To me, it's distracting to have email messages coming in when I'm trying to do an online meeting. If I'm connected to a mail server and pulling messages in, I would think that it must affect the performance in some way.
Jack, that's a great question. This absolutely affects performance. Remember, you have this pipe that connects you to the internet. And if it's pulling in heavy emails and constantly communicating with a server for instant messaging, then those files will be taking up that connection resource to send and receive data. It is absolutely the best practice to close all other programs, such as instant messaging applications or email, and make sure you're not on a VPN connection or anything else that may adversely affect your bandwidth or latency. Also, do not use a wireless connection as a broadcaster. Wireless connections are not as robust as a hardwired LAN or DSL connection. Hardwire when at all possible during any virtual meeting and training session.
Okay, that helps. The picture is getting clearer. And I like the pipe analogy. That makes a great deal of sense. Hey, if I want to broadcast my voice through the meeting room directly instead of using minutes on a teleconference, what type of equipment do I need for that?
Well, Jack, a USB headset is preferred for broadcasting voice over IP. These headsets are pretty cheap. Not that that's a big deal for you, but we want to share that with our audience. I've worked with Logitech headsets that cost about $10, and they broadcast very clean audio. But regardless of how inexpensive or expensive your microphone is, it's always a best practice to run the audio setup wizard prior to your event. I never conduct a meeting without running that audio setup wizard. Even when I'm doing a meeting with the same room and the same microphone, I always make it a habit when I use voice over IP to run that wizard and ensure the microphone is calibrated properly and I'm getting the best possible quality in my broadcast. This wizard will ensure that all your levels are set properly. When we came into the studio today to do this session, our engineers all ran sound checks on our mics to ensure all levels were working. Same process here.
That's correct, Jackie. I always do extensive sound checks for all my sessions. I told you well.
Yes, you did, Mike. Always run that audio setup wizard. It only takes a minute or two, and it assures that the levels are ideal for your session.
Okay, let me flip down my notes here. This is really good stuff, Jackie. Thanks a lot. Now, here we go. I like to conduct my meetings with the studio and use various images, slide decks, and other types of canned assets. Now, how can I effectively go from photograph to slide deck and back to another asset, say a film clip, without seeing that preloader and having delays in my presentation?
Excellent question, Jack. You know that your content should be preloaded into pods and various layouts so you can easily flip to the content as you need it. There's a technique that we use called tiling that the power users of Connect set up in their main layout. You have to be organized and know your content very well. You won't be able to see what's behind the layered or tiled pod, but if you rehearsed and you know your material, this effect makes it seamless to deliver multiple assets without any delays in your delivery. For example, you would load an image of your production studio and talk about your location and where you can find it on the studio lot. Behind that JPEG image of your studio is a PowerPoint deck, and behind that deck is a film clip of your Oscar-winning performance from A Few Good Men. You would load A Few Good Men first, put the PowerPoint deck on top of the film clip, and the JPEG image on top of the slide deck. Now you have 3 share pods loaded with content on top of each other that are the same size. We only see the top layer. When you finish with the studio image, you hide the pod. Behind it is the slide deck ready to go. You can flip through your slide deck and set up the transition from the slide deck to the film clip. When you complete your slide deck, you hide that share pod, and your film clip is now broadcasting on the first frame. As a host of the meeting, you can see the controls to play it, and when you're ready to show the scene from the courtroom with Tom Cruise, there would be no preload time, and it would be as seamless as having all assets in one presentation. Is that clear?
Oh, yes, Jackie. Believe me, it's clear. It's crystal clear, if you get my drift. Well, we want the truth, and trust me, I can handle the truth. Okay, don't get me started or in character, or we will never get through my questions. Now, Jack, talk to me about really large events. Say when I have a few hundred or a few thousand people. What are some of your tips and tricks for conducting a meeting with that type of audience that requires a seminar room?
Well, Jack, you want to make sure you customize the arrangement of pods to accommodate what your session will include. Large meetings benefit from hiding the attendee list in the presenter-only area and linking the chat pod to a Q&A pod that is also in the presenter-only area. The reason is because we don't want our participants being distracted by people coming in and leaving and scrolling through all the names in the attendee list pod. So we suggest you move it all off stage and into the presenter-only area. This way, only hosts and presenters can see the people who have dialed in. Linking the chat pod to the Q&A pod is highly recommended. This will minimize the participants chatting and sending distracting messages during the presentation. If you have the chat pod linked, be sure you have a co-host as a support person to field questions and forward them to presenters. If I am not taking questions until the end, I always state in my delivery to let people know that all questions sent in will be addressed at the end of the meeting, not as they come in. Be clear about that in your agenda.
You know, that's great information, Jackie. I would not have thought about moving that attendee pod off the stage. That's a great point. So I arranged the pods in my layout before the meeting and would probably scale that chat pod to take up the space of where the attendee pod was. Great, I got it. I also tend to be very stingy about my stream. I would rather put up a headshot of myself instead of broadcasting my headshot with a webcam. Now this way, I don't have to shave and look pretty, and you know how difficult it is for me to look pretty, other than my inner beauty. Now, what other things do I need to know about streaming so that my audience gets the best possible user experience? I mean, what tips do you have so that there are minimal delays in the virtual meeting?
Well, Jack, if at all possible, stay away from using screen sharing because it's the most bandwidth-intensive capability. Instead, load slides or other content in pods like we talked about when we discussed tiling. For non-supported file formats for the SharePod, print them to flash paper so they can be brought into the SharePod and viewed in a very bandwidth-light format. So, if you have a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, these types of formats cannot be uploaded to the meeting room. Instead of doing a screen share, print them to flash paper. Now you have those same documents as a flash file or SWF. Now they can be uploaded as flash content and your stream is 90% less bandwidth intensive as screen sharing. This is extremely important when recording. The file size of the recording is 90 times bigger when you screen share over using flash paper. However, flash paper is not the answer for everything, and screen sharing is one of the best features of Connect. So if and when you screen share, do it for small periods of time and be very concise with your delivery. Set your desktop screen resolution to 1024 by 768 and move all the clutter from your desktop. Setting your desktop background to a single color as opposed to an image will also help with bandwidth. Remember, there is less information to broadcast with less colors.
Great tip. Hey, you mentioned recording, and that brings up another gray area for me. I like to record my meetings so I can do them once, and if I need to get that information to people who were on location shooting, I can give them a link. This makes effective use of my time, so I have plenty of free time for golf and Lakers games. Hey, talk to me about recordings. I don't need all the details, just some best practices.
I know, it's getting late and we have to wrap up. I don't want to keep you from the golf course because it's a nice day out today.
Thank you, darling. I appreciate that.
If you're recording a meeting, the best practice is to keep your recordings under an hour. For longer meetings, this may mean making several recordings for each portion. I sometimes do it in chunks of 30 minutes or less. Also keep in mind, the recordings are indexed according to the slide layout. So it's also a best practice to break your meeting into pieces with the layouts so your transcription of the recording is reflected in sections that match up with your layout. Also, if you're not using Voice over IP and do not have an integrated teleconference like Premiere Global, you will need to set up a microphone even though you are using a speakerphone, and you must press the talk button and lock it. Many people forget about this and record the whole meeting with no audio.
Oh, been there and done that. I try to have one of my people do that for me. Just like Ellen DeGeneres has her people, I have my people. Good point with the shorter sections, using the layouts for the transcribed recording. And if I'm not using my Premiere Global integrated audio, I must set up my microphone and press that hands-free talk button. Got it. My driver isn't here yet, so let's really quick go through those minutes leading up to the meeting. What do you do prior to a big event?
Well, Jack, you must have a good strategy for the minutes leading up to the meeting start and then closing the meeting. Having a lobby layout is helpful in letting participants know that they are in the right place and that the meeting will be starting soon. Revolving slides built with Adobe Presenter or Captivate work very well. We did cover this in our training session. Also, use music or other engaging content to enhance the virtual experience. Loading in a custom background is also a nice touch. All these things are covered in the Adobe Certified Training. Remember, prior to the meeting starting, you should have your co-presenters present. You can elect to set the room to place participants on hold and set up an appropriate message while they're waiting at the front door of the meeting room. You can also allow guests to come into the lobby layout like we built in our training session. I like letting people into the lobby over keeping them at the front door on hold. Finally, ending the meeting well is something that's often overlooked. The best practice is to have some takeaway content already loaded into the file share pod and some ending polls for feedback. I also like to use the web links pod so I can push the participant's web browser to a specific page. Or you could also use the end meeting capability to do the same thing. This way you can wrap up your production meeting and you can send everyone to the website that tracks all the shooting locations and project plan. Now you're assured that everyone has the link and they can bookmark that page.
Excellent. That is really excellent. I got it. Thank you, Jackie. Oh, and here comes my driver. Thank you for spending a few minutes in the studio with me today to share your tips and tricks for conducting large meetings. I will definitely put this to good use for my kickoff meeting that I'm doing next week between New York and L.A. It's a bi-coastal meeting. This saves so much time and money with travel and allows me to work efficiently and effectively. Less time in meetings, more time on the golf course. That works for me. Thanks for all your great advice, Jackie.
Hey, Jack, before you go, how about one more snippet from one of your movies?
Oh, yeah. This is one of my favorites. Some guy dressed like a bat gets all my press.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks so much. Listen, enjoy the links and go Lakers.
Thank you for joining our podcast on hosting large meetings with Adobe Acrobat Connect Professional. For more information on Adobe Connect Pro or e-learning, please go to Brookwood's website at www.brookwood.com. If you would like to contact our subject matter expert, Jacquie Beck, please send her an email at jbeck@brookwood.com. Thank you for joining us today. Please stay tuned for more podcasts coming from Jack and Jackie.